Hello and welcome to the Kids Chat to You webinar. I'm Julie Kenny.
And I'm Marion Van Eerop.
And we're delighted to have you with us for the next hour or so to talk about communication aids and the NDIS. So let's get started.
For today's workshop, we're going to talk about what are communication aids, how communication aids can help. We'll talk about the different types of communication aids and how to use them so that they are as effective as they can be, and most importantly, we'll be talking about the NDIS and how you can ensure you're accessing communication aids when you have your plan.
So just to tell you a little bit about the Kids Chat to You service, Kids Chat to You provides non-electronic communication aids to children in Victoria, and we also provide workshops and individual information consults where we provide information about communication aids and NDIS readiness. This is a statewide initiative made possible through the generous donations of our funding bodies, which is the Barness Family Foundation, Westfield, Scope, and a number of other bodies as well. And the goal is to enable people to be able to access appropriate communication aids and successfully transition to the NDIS. So this slide looks a little bit daunting. You don't need to worry too much about the terms on here. The main thing we just wanted to point out is that you'll see that NDIS funding comes into effectively these three categories of core supports, capital supports, and capacity building supports. If you're getting therapy in your plan, and this could be any therapy, this could be physiotherapy or speech pathology, that comes under the capacity building supports section. But what we just want everyone to know is that when you actually need equipment or what we call assistive technology, that is actually a separate item and it comes under the capital support section. So the next slide I'm going to show you will make a little bit more sense of that. So for example, if you were to have an NDIS plan and you've received some funding for speech pathology, you'll most likely see a line item on there, which is the one that you can see in the top right of the table that's called Individual Assessment Therapy and or Training, including Assistive Technology. Just what's really important about this one is that even though it says includes assistive technology, that actually is including your therapist's time to help to assess, prescribe and support the implementation of the assistive technology. It doesn't actually fund the piece of equipment itself. And that's why it's really important to also have the line item that you can see in the line below on the table of assistive technology. This just means that you'll also be able to access funding for the actual piece of equipment itself. And that could be, for example, a wheelchair, or in the case of the work that we do, that might be your communication aid. So we've got a couple of options on the screen there. The first was just saying if you're not sure what you need, you have an idea but you're not really sure, you can ask for assistive technology to be included in your NDIS plan, and sometimes you might see that displayed with a $1 amount. That just means it's sort of in there, but you're still going to need to get a quote when you've got more of an idea of what you want, when your therapist has made their recommendation. The other option is though, and especially if you're getting ready for your planning meeting, and if your therapist has already recommended a certain type of aid, you're very welcome to get in touch with us, and we are very happy to be able to provide you with a written quote that you can take to your planning meeting to be considered for your NDIS plan. So we just have a few little tips in relation to this. The first is that when you're coming up to your planning meeting, do think about what sort of communication aids you need now and may need in the future. This might also include, you might have, for example, a non-electronic aid that's working really well at the moment, but it might just need to be that you need a fresher version, or you want another copy, or you might need to get it updated. And we often recommend around every 12 months or so, you might want to get your communication aid updated. So as we were just saying, you're more than welcome to contact us, and we're happy to provide a quote that you can take to your NDIS planning meeting. Association for Children with Disabilities NDIS workbook that you can find via their website. This is a really handy resource. It covers all different areas, not just around communication, but we'd recommend if you're sort of at that stage where you're just thinking about how to get ready for your planning meeting, it's well worth a look. Do make sure that before your next planning meeting you've had time to really think about, as we said, all elements of what would be in your plan, but just to think about what's been working or what you want in your next plan. If for whatever reason you don't use the funding that was allocated in your last plan, we often recommend that people would provide the NDIS with a written reason just as to why that's been. It can be for many different reasons. such as having difficulty locating providers, that sort of thing, but just to let them know why, so that it can still justify if you feel you need that funding for the next NDIS plan. You can certainly ask for a face-to-face planning meeting, which particularly for someone with communication difficulties is what we would usually find is the most helpful way of having a planning meeting, and obviously then that person's communication can be supported. But you can ask to see the plan before it's finalised and to be sent a draft just so you can check how it's coming together. And we just wanted to mention the support coordination service and the early childhood early intervention partners. These are people that they can actually, that support can actually get funded in your NDIS plan, particularly if you've got quite a complex or comprehensive plan, especially maybe too if it's your first time learning to implement these. You can ask for these supports to actually be included in the plan, and the support coordinator or the ECI partner can help you get that plan into action and start implementation.
Right, so we'll move now to talking about communication and communication aids. When we're talking about communication, especially in the context of today, what we mean is that it is a successful exchange of information between two or more people. And it really does involve sharing that message effectively with the other person. We communicate for many different reasons, as well as requesting or saying our wants and needs. We're also communicating for so many social purposes. We're communicating to tell stories and share jokes and share opinions, to give directions, to
argue, offer help, problem solve, comment and respond to others. It doesn't matter how a child does this, if they're using their voice, a picture, or a keyboard, but it is important that they have a way to participate, especially for children if they don't have a lot of words. So they might show their feelings with facial expression and emotion, and they'll show protests by using behaviour. And when a child isn't using words for these things, we look for another way, for alternative ways to help teach him or her how to express these different things. It's important that every child has the opportunity to communicate with others. Don't wait and see if your child will be so frustrated that they will talk, or wait and see if maybe in a few months things will be right. Using a communication aid isn't going to harm a child's development in any way. It's only going to add value. So do use a communication aid if your child isn't talking yet, or if your child is talking but they're really hard to understand. It's a way to give him some success, to help him keep learning language and building positive relationships even when the words aren't there yet. Most importantly, your child needs you. They need someone to communicate with who will take the time to listen and help and build that supportive place where they can try, and also who can keep offering them reasons to communicate. This can mean playing with them, playing a game that they like, and giving them lots of motivating opportunities. But this is something we'll talk about more later on our camp communication slide in a minute. Keep in mind as well that when a child has a communication aid, it should always be available to them. We know that everyone benefits from communication aids, including people who can talk. I'm benefiting from what's on the screen here, as I hope that you are as well. But children with communication difficulties might show it in ways that aren't just to do with words. They might have difficulty with their attention and their focus. It can be affected by anxiety, and that anxiety can impact on someone's understanding about spoken information and also their ability to use their spoken language. Transition can be harder for children as well. So coping with new demands, going up a year in school, or transitioning between one activity to another, and having some kind of a picture or structure in place that can show that to your child can go a long way to helping. Knowing about things that you can't see, like concepts like weight. Weight is so hard for little ones we work with, or knowing what tomorrow or next week mean. So using communication aids really does help with more than just the speech, and it helps with participation. There isn't really any part of life that doesn't need communication in some form or another. Here are some of the things that people might think if a child isn't talking or isn't hitting his or her communication milestones. We won't go through all of them now, but we'll talk about a few of them. Do come along to the workshop as well and bring your own questions that you've got. But yes, we'll talk about a couple. So he's starting to talk, and if you use visuals, he'll stop talking. I can only say that AAC, or using alternative picture communication, is not a last resort. There are no research findings, no evidence. No one has ever found that using communication aids has harmed a child's language development or stopped them from learning to talk. There are findings that show that vocabulary increases, there are increases in how much children say, in the length of their phrases, and a whole lot of other things. She can't speak, so she has nothing to say. To this, I'd just say that communication aids allow for the use of language even when speech isn't there yet. There are wait and see families, people who want to first just give it a few months and wait and see if speech and language will develop before using communication aids. And it sounds like a safe and reasonable thing to do, but we do know that speech and language develop at different rates. And if a child's language is being held back because his little mouth isn't doing what he wants it to do, that speech-only approach to therapy can really limit their language development. So if you can say one word, but putting two words together is just too hard, then maybe providing another way is a good thing to do. In terms of, we know him so well now that we can all understand what he wants, I would take you back to a quote about communication autonomy that I think Gail Porter had said, which is being able to say whatever you want to say to whoever you want to say it to, whenever and wherever you want to say it. When you give him his device, he'll start communicating straight away. This is the big one. A lot of people have these great expectations of their communication aid. Again, it's not a silver bullet. It's not something that works immediately. When you think about typical language acquisition and how it takes 12 months before we start expecting a baby to say its first words, it does take a lot of time and a lot of showing and modeling and using those words around the child for them to learn to use it. So it does take time. We know that the success a child has at communicating something will motivate him to do it again. So communication aids really support that development of natural speech. The only other thing I'll say here is around those prerequisites. We've had a few workshops now, Kids Chat to You workshops, where people have asked us about what skills their child needs before they can start using a communication aid, and there aren't any. We would never withhold communication from a child because they're not sitting still or because they're not showing good eye contact. So behavior and cognition and the ability to attend are not prerequisites to introducing a communication aid. And again, we'll go into this in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. Oh, and lastly, there is a link at the bottom of the slide there that will take you to a podcast on AAC myths and cerebral palsy, and that was done through the Royal Children's Hospital by Katie Lyon and Gemma Holleran.
And when we're talking about these communication aids, we tend to divide them up between aided and unaided. So the heading there is Augmentative and Alternative Communication, or AAC, and what that means is something that's going to enhance the message over and above the spoken words. So when it comes to aided AAC, this can be real objects in the environment that you can point to and look at and show. There can be symbols of those objects, and then things become more abstract. It can be a picture that's a photograph, it could be a line drawing, it could be a symbol, and there's a variety of symbol sets, or it can be writing, and any of those can appear on your electronic device, such as an iPad or a Dynavox or any kind of device that you've got. And as well as aided, we also have our unaided AAC strategies. So that's using what you've got without something additional to help get that message across.
Think about what's already in your communication toolkit that you're using and ramp it up. Use your body language, point to things, gesture at things, use lots of intonation to highlight the words that you're saying, and lots of facial expression to really push that message to your child. And it makes you a lot more fun and a lot more interesting to look at the same time as really pushing that message.
And keeping with that total communication approach, we'd really support the use of any of those strategies. And sometimes it might be in combination, or sometimes it might be in different situations. So, so we've got a few different examples here of how different types of tools might be helpful for people. So we've got an example of Georgia is given a real nappy and told it's time for toilet. So in that case, the real object has been used to help explain what's happening. Our next example is Gemma signs home at kinder and we're ready to go. So she's using keyword signs, so that's a form of the unaided communication. Or Katie is shown a photo of the swimming pool and goes off to get her towel. So in that case, we're talking about using a picture or a symbol support to be able to help get that message across.
And it really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach at all, and the context. So there might be times where a photo is appropriate, but other times where a sign is more appropriate. So we do recommend having lots of different kinds of communication aids for different purposes.
This table might look a little bit scary to start with, but we think it's really helpful. And the reason is we just wanted to split up a few different types of tools and just why we actually use them. So the first three reasons that we wanted to talk about that you would use a communication aid. The first is for expressive communication, so to help somebody get their message across. And that can then be split into two different types of aids. We've got comprehensive, which might mean that you can use it in lots of different situations, or targeted, meaning that it might be quite specific for use in a certain situation or around a certain activity or vocabulary. The second main purpose is to help support receptive communication or understanding, and often that comes under what we sort of call visual supports. And when you think about it, we all use visual supports every day, whether we're looking at traffic lights to let us know whether it's safe to go, or using texting on our phones, looking at signs to indicate where the bathrooms are. They're supports that can be helpful to everybody. There's also sometimes picture stories, which might be to help support positive behaviour or to help understand certain social situations. The third type is aids that are specifically to support communication partners of that person with a communication difficulty. So those are aids effectively that the child, for example, might not actually be using themselves, but somebody who supports them might use to get to know more about them, how they communicate and how they can support them. Across the top of that table there, you can see we had some of those examples split into three columns. And they were some of the ones that Marion was just talking about before. So we've got some no-tech options, which is effectively use of keyword sign, all those unaided options. We've got some of the low-tech or non-electronic communication aid options. They're going to be what we're going to be talking about predominantly today, just because that's one of the areas that we specialise in. There's also, of course, high-tech options, which is effectively electronic options. That might be a dedicated speech-generating device, or a tablet or an iPad with an app that can be used. And as we were just saying, usually for somebody who has communication difficulties and needs these types of aids, it might be that using a combination of all of these at different times is what's going to be helpful. But as I said, we're going to be focusing on the low-tech options today.
Before showing examples of communication aids, we're going to talk about implementation. So to make sure that once you get that communication aid, you know what to do with it. For children to learn to use a communication aid and to accept it as that, everyone who communicates with them needs to use that communication aid too.
So when we typically learn to talk, we hear spoken language for 12 months before we expect a child to say their first words, but we still talk to them. We talk around them, and everyone around them is using words as well. And for someone who's meeting their communication milestones, spoken language will, after feeding that in for so many months, they will learn to talk as well. But there are roadblocks for some children, and we do exactly the same principles of modeling that language, except this time we're adding that visual stimulus as well. So we feed the AAC in by using it ourselves, by using it in real situations, by using it meaningfully, and by showing children how effective that can be. And without putting pressure on them to learn it immediately. It is something that takes time, especially thinking about what kind of communication aid it is that you're trying to teach. And of course, thinking about the child's understanding of language to begin with. So that's called aided language stimulation or modeling.
This is such a good way to think about communication aids and how we make them work. How can we model communication aids all the time? It's such a big ask. No matter what the communication aid is, no matter how skilled or unskilled we are or the child is, how can we always do our best? By using CAMP, of course.
So that is to create the communication opportunity, to add a visual, to model the communication aid, and then to pause and prompt them if necessary. So by creating a communication opportunity, what we mean by that is by creating a motivating situation, creating an environment where the child has a reason to talk or to use that communication aid. So it could be singing their favorite song, it could be providing a choice of 2 items or more. It could be using some creative sabotage and making things a little bit harder for them and not anticipating everything for them. Once we've created that communication opportunity, we have to make sure that the child has a way to communicate, and thinking of what that visual or communication aid is, and then modeling that to them. And sometimes you'll have to model it a couple of times and a child may respond to that, and other times you might need to model it for a lot longer. So you really are wanting a communication aid where you're going to be using that every day and in lots of different situations. And that last one there, the pause, the power of the pause is often overlooked, and really thinking of children who have difficulties with language processing, giving them that time to think about what you've asked them, to think about how to respond, maybe count to 10 in your head, and give them that time. And if you have camped your activity or your situation, hopefully over time you will see the child using those communication aids effectively.
If you're a parent who's listening now and you're thinking, hey, this is something I can try, or something I'm going to ask my therapist about when I see her next week, ask about what you can or how you can create those teachable moments throughout your day, and ask what are some small changes you can do to create that opportunity for your child to express himself. We're going to look at particular communication aids now, while also keeping CAMP in mind and teaching communication by modeling that communication aid. This video is found on YouTube and is called Get the Cheese.
Do you want something else? Oh, more to say. More to say. I like this. You like this? Oh, go back to page 1. Go back to page 1. More to say. I want. You hear, I know you hear the gardener outside. You see the fly. Yeah, I see a fly. Did you want something, Finn? You want to make something? Oh, you wanted something, some food, something to eat or drink. Food, yeah. You want cheese. Cheese, go back to page 18A. Yeah, I know you wanted food. What did you want? You're finished with the cheese? Or you wanted more? You wanted more? Yeah. Oh, you wanted more. You wanted more. Let me go back to page 1. You wanted more. I know. Turn the page. You want more. More what? More. More, please. You want more, please. Go get it. Huh? Go back to page 1. Hurry up. Hurry up and get it. Hurry up. Okay. Okay. Get the cheese. Yeah, you smiling now? Go get it.
That was an example of a great camping opportunity where the little boy in that video, he was motivated. His communication opportunity was that he loves cheese and he wanted some more cheese. And his mum was able to be a fabulous communication partner. And not only did he have a pod communication book there with him, but his mum was able to help him navigate through that and modeled some new words to him. She modeled hurry up to him, which he wasn't using himself, but he was using quite a few of those vocab words, but it would have taken a lot of modeling to get there in the first place. So that book that we've looked at, if we think back to that complex table from before, is called a pod communication book, which is a comprehensive communication aid. So that means it's a book that you can use to express yourself for a number of different reasons, in lots of different contexts and with different people.
And its example of the book, it was designed by Gail Porter at CPEC, but it's very carefully structured. So it's a very, as Marion said, it's a very comprehensive book. It does require considerable support to implement effectively, but can have really amazing outcomes. And the reason it's designed so carefully in its structure is to minimise some of the common difficulties that sometimes can happen with books that are just sort of put together cell by cell or image by image, and that it's designed to help the flow and make it easier to be able to use and faster to access vocabulary and produce your messages. So communication, a pod is a type of communication book, but we also have the term communication book, which can cover a lot of different sorts of aids. Usually this might be, it's definitely, it's under one of those expressive and receptive communication aids. So it can be certainly to help a child, support a child's understanding, but also then for them to be able to get their message across. And these can really be as simple or as complex as you need them to be. And the organisation is very, very flexible here. We'd recommend that you talk about this with your speech pathologist to get their support in helping put one of these together. Sometimes you might have certain ones that are separated into categories, but you can have them in lots of different varieties.
Now, just thinking back to that video we saw of the little boy using his pod book, some feedback that we've been having in the workshops that we're running for Kids Chat to You is that little boy is doing very well, and we do acknowledge that while it's taken him a lot of time, most likely, to learn to use that book, there are steps towards that success, and it's worth taking the time to think about all the little steps involved in learning to use your communication aid effectively so that you can celebrate that progress along the way. These 6 items that you can see in front of you are they're from an article from the Speak for Yourself website, where they explain it in a bit more detail. But basically, when we talk about introducing a communication aid, we're exposing the child to something new. And often children they don't notice the communication aid, or they see it as a toy or something, a distraction or something that they'll throw away. But keep having it there, keep introducing the communication aid, and whatever it is, just making sure that you're using it and you are valuing it. So that's a huge step of success. The next thing you might start to see is that the child will acknowledge that it is there, that the communication aid is always on the table when you're working or on the floor while you're playing. And they might look towards it when you're using it. They might start to become curious and watch what you're doing and see the effects that it has when you use it. And that's something to really look out for and notice if your child is attending more to the communication aid than when you first introduced it. Children might then start to try it. And again, similar to a child learning to speak when they're saying their first words, they might not be very accurate at all. So with a pod book or another kind of communication book, they might hit on the wrong word or in the wrong area of the book, but respond to that meaningfully so that they get that motivation of the fact that using a communication aid has had an effect. After that, children really do start to accept the communication aid and expect it to be there. And then the final step is actually starting to explore that communication aid and learning where the new vocabulary and new words are. And that's really the pinnacle of Everest.
Window? A window. What shape? What shape, Jamie? Is it? Come here.
Not.
Is it circle? No. It's a...
The door, is it?
Your turn. Do you want to do some circles?
Please, I need circles to help around the
For
circle.
the wheels?
Yes.
Jamie's turn.
One for the door, yes. One for the door.
Yacht. One circle.
Jamie, you know how to do a circle. You can help more than that.
Your turn.
Round, isn't it? Round. 2 wheels on the back. Round.
And again.
Brilliant.
Oh, good work, Jamie.
Anything else? A bump. A
Wow,
bumper.
that was
Okay.
awesome.
Awesome bumper. A bumper. Okay. Yes, Emma, I need a bumper. I've got a truck. And more.
What else, Jamie?
More circles. Circle lights. Yes, lights. This way, okay.
What else, Jamie? Is it all done, Jamie?
All done.
Is it finished?
Finished.
What we just saw there was a little boy using his core language board. In fact, he wasn't using it. He was jumping up and down on the stairs, and he was much more interested. If we think about camp again, the activity was very motivating for him because he must love cars, and they're drawing a car. They've added that core language board on the screen here as an example of a core language board. He was using a Pixon board, but it has the core words on it, and those are the words that we use the majority of the time in our spoken language. So having a core set of these words and learning to use them can be a very powerful thing to teach children. The 2 adults in that video were modeling a lot more than the little boy was using it himself. And if you think about the steps of success, I'm not too sure where I would place him, but I think he's at a level of curiosity and trying it out, but definitely well on the way to success. There are lots of different kinds of core language boards out there. You can always add some of that personal core vocab, which would be names and toys that are really important to the child that are in their core lexicon. And you can also add more fringe vocabulary. And by fringe vocabulary, I mean more of those nouns and things that people might want to talk about in specific activities.
As a quick recap, we've just talked about the comprehensive expressive communication aids. That can be a book, it can be laid out in categories or a pod book. It could be a board with the alphabet on it if your child is literate and can point to the letters. It can be keyword sign, it can be something on a high-tech communication device. But now what we're going to do is talk about targeted communication aids, which means those extra visual supports you use only in particular activities, and the child doesn't have that with them all of the time. And these give you the vocabulary to let you and your child interact during a specific activity or about a particular topic or game.
So, for example, you can see on the page there, one of the example at the top is of a placemat communication board, and these boards can be really helpful, particularly around meal time. So, as you can see, there's not a lot of symbols on there, but it might be things that are particularly related to what you might want to talk about at meal times. Below, you can see an example of some community request cards. These are a really handy type of aid. As we discussed, they're targeted, so they have a limited purpose. So usually it might be, for example, you might use them asking to buy a movie ticket if that's going to be hard to get across verbally. But it can be really helpful, and often it has a picture on there for the child to use, but there'll also be some text as well, which is for the communication partner. But you can also use these sorts of cards in many different situations, or even just sort of little choice cards. And we also just have an example there of a sort of an activity-specific display or an aided language display. So it's effectively a communication board, but you can see that the one there is, for example, around sort of playing bubbles and sort of water play. So it's all in relation to a specific topic. So we have an example here now of a chat book. A chat book is another really handy aid. They're really easy to put together. The idea is that it's a tool that can be used to help support the person's understanding of what's actually been happening, what they've been doing, but also then to share that information. And they really can be as simple as just having a display folder with some plastic A4 sleeves, popping a page in there. You can just handwrite what you've been up to on the weekend. Usually we recommend putting in either a photo if you've got it, or a remnant can be really lovely, sort of a memento of what you've been doing. So you can see on the screen, for example, you might have a balloon from a party that you went to on the weekend, and especially actually involving it's really important to involve the child in this. So actually, get them to help choose. Maybe it's going to be a leaf from the park where you've been out that afternoon. But again, it can be really helpful for that relationship building as well. So when they're communicating with other people, there can be that extra information for the communication partner to support conversation, but it's also a tool that the child can use themselves to share their news. So just like we were saying, like those community request cards, we can also have sort of choice boards and cards that you might use in lots of different situations. It might be to choose, anything from sort of food to what you're going to wear today, or what sort of activity you'd like to do.
I would say to make choices whenever you can find a reason to, because it's an opportunity that you're creating. So do you want the crayons or the markers? Do you want juice or milk? Should we go outside or stay inside? Instead of using lots of words, using a few words paired with a picture or a gesture can be so much more effective for little ones with communication difficulties.
A break card can also be really helpful too. Sometimes we often know that sort of teachers might have those sorts of cards on lanyards at school, but it can be really helpful for a child to actually have access to some of these cards as well, particularly if it's for them to indicate if they might want to take a break or do something different, just to get that message across. Because if they don't have a way of communicating that can obviously become very frustrating for them and potentially escalate. So it's really important they have that means to communicate their message.
Another one that we don't have on the screen is waiting. And I've mentioned waiting already as such an abstract concept. Where do I wait? How long do I wait? What is waiting? And what do I do while I wait? So making a wait card can really provide that meaning. And when you ask your child to wait, hand him that card, say, wait, please. After the wait, say, thank you for waiting, and take back the card. And then this gives it a really clear beginning and end to that wait time and distinguishes it from no. Children we see often have trouble recalling and sharing events. So they never tell their parents what they did at school that day. They aren't able to recall it, or they don't have the words to say it. So creating a My Day book that's adapted for your child really helps with this.
A My Day book is another really handy communication aid. They're very popular at the moment. They're great, again, they're targeted tools. They don't have everything you could possibly talk about in there, but they're really specifically targeted around to what's happened during the day. And we have some different versions. There's particularly sort of a preschool and a school version. You can actually select what you want to be in there. And the cards are all stored in the book, but what you use the cards for is to help construct effectively a series of sentences at the front of the book. So it might be around, today is, or I've done, I played with, tomorrow I need to bring.
And it's something that we've had feedback from families attending Kids Chat to You consultations, that they use them for show and tell during the day as well. So it's a nice way for children to share their news.
If you do something on the weekend with your child before you go, you can show them the picture of where you're going, who you're going with, or even include a picture about how you're feeling. And you can look at it again after you've done it too. And then on Monday morning at show and tell, when your child pulls out his book from his bag, it's something that he's seen before and he's already been over with you. And it's a cue to help recall and share that information and speech. So now we're going to have a look at communication aids for understanding. These create structure and routine, and they take away that uncertainty to help when there is change.
The examples here, there's a monthly calendar, but it could even be a weekly calendar, or even a visual schedule just of what's happening in the day. And that can provide help for a child to know what's coming up in their day, that they can predict.
Also be helpful for supporting positive behaviour too, because it means that children know what's expected of them, what's going to happen in what order, and what they need to do. You can have lots of different types of calendars. These are just some examples. So you can see some of our examples of magnetic monthly calendars. We also have weekly calendars. We also have object symbol calendars as well, which again, if the child's having trouble understanding pictures, sometimes it might be helpful to have the real object as well, just as that sort of more concrete example. And as you can see in the bottom with the timetable with the clock, you can really lay these out however's going to be most helpful, and in as much or as little detail as is required at the time.
Something that you might think after it's working well is that you can stop using it or fade it out, that she knows her routine and we don't need to use this anymore. But I know I like my to-do lists and I like my calendars, and these kinds of calendars and communication aids go a long way to help children be independent. Having it available to mark something that's out of routine or unexpected or a special occasion, just to give that child a heads up that something is going to happen. And it's also really useful because there's always going to be changes in the future and transitions in the future. So moving through to high school or moving house or something different where it's really worth having a communication aid that your child knows and is familiar with.
A first and then board is very similar to using a timetable. It could be a nice introduction to using a timetable. It's where you show the child what they have to do now and then what they're going to do next. Often it's something less liked that the child needs to get through before they can have their reward. And it's a nice way of setting up a contract with the child so that they can understand that the less preferred thing isn't going to last forever, and that they will get to do something nicer later. At the same time, it's teaching those time concepts that again can be really abstract and hard to understand.
You can also use your object symbols here. You can use a book for when you're going to the library. They can carry their toothbrush for when it's time to brush their teeth, and anything that can symbolize what's happening now and happening next.
Matthew, when you're finished, you can go play.
Difficulties with comprehension can interfere with the child's ability to benefit from this kind of verbal explanation. He needs to be given this information in a simple but visual way. For example, when we use a first-then board, the student can see that when he's finished his work, he can have his favorite toy.
First numbers, then VTech.
This teacher is showing her student that when he's finished doing the number activity, he can play with the VTech.
One more, find 9. That's right, you did it. Good job. Okay, numbers are finished. Time for VTech. Here you go.
Over time, the goal will be to increase the amount of time the student is expected to sit and cooperate with a series of tasks.
We're going to do piggy bank, then shapes, then string.
This is the student 2 months later. Now he is able to do 3 tasks before he needs a break.
My turn.
My turn.
My turn.
My turn.
Last one, my turn. Piggy bank is finished. Put away. Time for shapes. Yellow giraffe. Good for you. Listen. Shapes are finished. Time for string. Good job. Put away. Time for toys.
So communication aids like these really help to make sense of the world for children who might not gain much information from what you say to them.
We've also got a little finished sign at the bottom there just to highlight it is really important to let children know when they're done. And that's a really handy feature of visual tools that you can have a little finished flag or something to let them know when they can have their free time again.
Children with communication difficulties can find it really hard to remember the next steps in an activity. And they might find it really hard to keep their attention focused on one task because they get distracted all the time. So things like these task schedules or even activity schedules can be done with photos or pictures that show the steps to complete the task. And so the steps in brushing my teeth or the steps involved in packing my school bag. And this can help your child to learn a routine and also help them with starting and finishing things that are new, and it gives them that information in a way that's easy for them to interpret and doesn't rely on remembering your words that just disappear once you've said them.
And it might be that, the first, many number of times that you do it, you actually need to go through it together. And then it might be that visual support can stay. This is an aid that the child can actually look at themselves just to remind them of the steps they need to do.
Children want to know, what do I have to do? How much do I have to do? And how do I know when I'm done? A chores chart can show them that visually and help them with that independence without you feeling like a nag asking them to do everything. So communication aids are so important when working on behavior management or teaching emotional regulation to children. They're just the best time to use your communication aids. And there are lots of different charts out there, like emotion thermometers and choice cards and rewards boards. You just have to look on Pinterest to see how much is out there. We won't have time to include everything in the webinar today, but we can definitely spend time on this in the workshop if you come along and ask us to, or you can contact us and arrange a time for a consult. We're just going to play one short video. It's from the Neshoba Learning Group, and you can find it on YouTube. It's a great example of how communication aids can be used for different purposes, and having a speech pathologist or a support worker who knows the situation and knows your child can help in getting that right fit of a communication aid.
I'm here to share a tip with you that we shared with a family who was having difficulty with a child who had all of a sudden developed an intense parental attachment to one of their parents and was experiencing a lot of anxiety related to this parent's comings and goings. In this particular case, Mom and Dad had taken a 3-day trip, something Mom had never done before, and when she returned, these behaviors started. All of a sudden, he would not use the bathroom unless she was present with him. She could not leave the house without his sitting at the window with whomever his caregiver was, crying and perhaps engaging in aggressive behavior. Showering routines, which he routinely completed with other people, was no longer okay. Mom always had to be present for those as well. So this became quite an issue for this family. So we decided we needed to have some sort of a visual to signal to this child Mom's comings and goings, and how could we best do that? So with Mom's help, we created this, which is in her kitchen, readily available, visible from many vantage points in the kitchen, so the child can see it from several different rooms. And what we included on here was a picture of the family car, a picture of the kitchen, and a clock. And what we asked Mom to do was each time she would go run an errand was to place herself in the car and then put her picture back in the kitchen, signaling that she would be returning to the house, and then estimate a time that she would be returning home. And whoever else would be traveling with her, those pictures went into the car as well. And as you can see, we just use headshots, making it easier to do. This worked beautifully. We had Mom practice this for several days, creating errands that she didn't have to run, so that this child could begin to see the connection between these pictures and Mom's comings and goings. Worked very, very well. What we hadn't accounted for is this child's anxiety related to his own departure from the house when Mom wasn't with him. So for that situation, we relied back on these visuals. We took just the picture of the kitchen with Mom's picture in it, and he traveled with this. So if he would leave the house and Mom were going to be staying home, he would take this in the car with him with whoever his caregiver was. He actually visually referenced it several times to remind himself that Mom would be available to him when he came home. This worked wonderfully. And again, you can tweak this as necessary for your own children. What we would also advise, what we asked Mom to do, was to make sure that if she was going nowhere, this chart sat in the kitchen just like this, so he didn't need to get up close to see that nobody was leaving, nobody was coming back. And he could actually, if he was looking for Mom, he would glance into the kitchen, see this strip with nothing on it, and know Mom was in the house, and then comfortably engage in whatever his routine was. So this was a really helpful tip for this family. It made life quite a bit easier for them.
Communication aids for the communication partner.
So when we're thinking about those aids that were actually more for the communication partners to help support them, support the child that they're working with, an example of one of those types of aids is a book about me. These can be a lovely type of aid. The idea is that you can put whatever information you feel is helpful to the person supporting the child. Usually we'd have a bit of an about me section, particularly some likes and dislikes. You can put some medical information in there if you want. Usually we keep it more as sort of a social tool. Might be also things that are maybe unique to the child as well, certain things, ways that they can express themselves, if there's any really useful strategies that are important. So it's often handy to think about, as someone who knows that child really well, so often as a parent or a family member or someone who has been supporting that child for a long time, what would you tell somebody completely new who's coming in? Because it can be really helpful for new people at the child's meeting, new support workers or carers or teachers, just to know a bit more about them. Another extension of this type of aid, really, and I often put these types of aids together because I think they complement very nicely, is a personal communication dictionary. This can be extremely helpful if your child has certain ways of communicating things that are not necessarily intuitive to someone who doesn't know them well. And it might not always be that we're 100% certain that's what it is, but it might be that we, as you can see by the titles, it might be when I do this, it may mean something, and so you could respond in a certain way. So it's not to say it's going to always be that, but the best way to put these sorts of aids together is to get a number of people around the table who know that child really well and in different situations and environments, and come up with some of those things that you can put in there. And often we do find sometimes in different environments you might have different ways that somebody might express something, but particularly sometimes it might come through, it might be expressed in certain types of behaviours or ways that it might be facial expressions if they are unable to express that verbally, but that sort of stuff is really important.
Here we're just showing you a list, a page of lots of different communication aids, just to highlight that it isn't one communication aid that's going to do everything, and that there are communication aids for many different purposes, as we've been saying. Again, thinking about the NDIS, it's something where you can absolutely have more than one communication aid funded. Someone might use something like a pod book to express themselves, but when they're going to the pool, they might need to have some armbands with some key phrases on them, or they might also need to have a timetable. And so definitely something to have in your toolkit would be some keyword sign, as well as all those unaided AOC strategies we talked about before, and then thinking about what other kinds of communication aids you need.
So we're just going to briefly mention about a couple of apps that the Scope has produced. There's the Tools to Talk Plus app and the Keyword Sign Australia app. The links that you can see on the screen, I really recommend you take a look at those. They have really helpful demonstrations of how to actually use the apps. We're not going to go through them today, but please by all means check out those videos. The Tools to Talk app is a fabulous app. It has access to the Picture Communication Symbols Library, and you can use it to essentially make your own non-electronic communication aids. There's also a chat function on that app, so you can get some verbal feedback from the app when you're using the boards and different types of aids as well. Keyword Sign Australia app is another fabulous app. It has videos of a lot of the Keyword Sign interactive vocabulary. It links to the Auslan webpage for any extra signs there, and you can also use it to make non-electronic communication aids and different types of books, or again might be sort of visual supports where you've got some of the signs there as well. So, so definitely worth a look for those apps, and they can be apps that you can access as part of your NDIS supports as well.
In terms of keyword sign, there are so many resources available. You can find these on the Scope website. This is just a range of a few of them. There's some posters that you can purchase that have specific topic vocabulary. There's the Getting Started with Keyword Sign book that has the basic interactive vocabulary. We've got our Let's Play with Sign book. It's a really nice way to start using sign in games and in songs with children, where it breaks down the particular words that you would sign in a song, as well as how you would move that from introducing one sign to introducing phrases.
I'd also recommend too having a look at the Scope website in the information and resources or information and downloads section. There's some lovely resources. There's Sing, See, Sign nursery rhymes, which you can access there, along with a lot of other really helpful resources that are available.
So just before we wrap up, we'll talk to you about some of the services and resources that might be able to support you moving into the NDIS. We've already mentioned support coordinators, and there are also local area coordinators who are available to help with sourcing the supports in your area. We've also got the Association for Children with a Disability, who we've mentioned before. They do have a program called the Strengthening Parents Support Program, and that's throughout Victoria, where a representative can speak with you and assist you in any way that you need, and they can really point you in the direction of respite services and other care services. Speech Pathology Australia is always a recommended resource. They have a page called Find a Speech Pathologist, where you can type in the areas that you're in, or surrounding areas that you would travel to, as well as choose the particular specialty of speech pathologist. So you might want to have a speech pathologist who works in disability or in AAC, who can work with your child, and that's a nice way to filter them and find someone. NDIS Grassroots is a Facebook page where if you've got any questions or any feedback that you can post, it's an amazing resource to have a look through, and they also have a variety of documents up there that might be helpful to look through.
So I suppose where to from here, you can definitely think about some different communication aids, especially getting ready for NDIS planning. If any of the ones that you've seen today have been of interest, that might be a good place to start. You can make your own communication aids, such as using the app that we talked about, or you can send in a Kids Chat application form to us. So at the moment, we do have part of that philanthropic funding is that we are able to manufacture communication aids for children in Victoria who do not yet have access to NDIS funding, but we certainly can also still manufacture them for children who do have NDIS funding. It's just a slightly different process from our end paperwork wise, so please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any queries about that. We'd be more than happy to help. You can access those local services that Marion ran through. Definitely start thinking about getting ready for your NDIS plan or your NDIS plan review. And don't forget what's already in your communication toolkit and Camp Your Days. Obviously, the things we've talked about today have been a lot of different general, a lot of information that, all of it's helpful information, but obviously it's really important to tailor that to the individual child. So we would recommend having a speech pathologist to support you through that process. We also want to let you know that we, especially for those people who are based in Victoria, please check out the link on the screen. This is our Kids Chat to You webpage. So we are going to be travelling throughout Victoria, lots of different locations and dates, providing face-to-face workshops. So it'll be some similar content to what we've gone through today, but in more detail and much more interactive. We're bringing lots of amazing communication aids with us that you can see, have a play with, see how useful they really can be, and some of the different variations. And so they're all free to access as part of the funding. We also are offering free information consults when we run those workshops as well. So that's after the workshop, we can catch up for an individual session just to talk about if there's anything specifically, or if, and you can bring your child along to that as well if you'd like to get some more tailored advice regarding some communication aids for them, or to help you actually if you're already thinking about putting in an application, just helping you pull that all together.
So these are our contact details here. If you do want any other additional information about the workshops or the consults, please do contact us, and please share this information with anyone who you think might be interested as well.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. We look forward to hearing from you.